Please come in and take a seat. We're going to get started. Good evening, folks. We're going to get started now. I apologize for the delay. I know we still have people in transit, but we need to get started. My name is Bob McDermott. I'm a state representative. Thank you for coming tonight to hear a wonderful man, Dr. Joe McIlhaney. Before we get started, I'd like to do some acknowledgments. I'd like to acknowledge a fellow who helps us with all our research and helped prepare that report you got tonight when you came in, Mr. Paul Canojo. I'd like to also acknowledge Mr. Keith Rollman, who's in the back there. I think Paul's running around. Let's give Keith a hand. I think Susan Duffy, who does everything. There's Susan. Thank you. My big brother and a guy who always offers me encouragement, Representative Ward back there. Let's give him a hand. Representative Feki Puaho from North Shore, he's back there. Let's give Feki a hand. My good friend Dr. Cregan is in the back there from the Big Island. Let's give him a hand. We've been on the radio all week this week, and some folks who made this week possible is Art and Peggy Hanneman. Art, where are you? Let's give him a hand. There he is. Art is unstoppable. I also like to acknowledge Colin White, Allen, and Junior, Lupe, and Lupe. I don't know if they want their last names mentioned, so I withheld those. Michelle from Minority Research, and Olelo for broadcasting tonight. Of course, Dr. McIlhaney, who you'll hear from tonight and get some very insightful information, and of course my lovely wife Utu over there. Thank you, honey. Okay, so you got McDermott Report 3 in your hands. It is a comprehensive digest. It's more information I'm going to be able to cover tonight, but I encourage you to read that. That thing is meticulously researched and flawless, and I owe that to Mr. Canojo because he is just fantastic. Okay, let's begin. Next slide, please. So you remember Pono Choices, what happened? When even the news media agrees with you, you know they've gone too far. And it's not often a politician gets wings, but in this case I did. And I can tell you that they never talked to Utu about that. So next slide, please. So here's the timeline of the Pono Choices curriculum. November 2013, we request for the curriculum on the heels of same-sex marriage. They won't give it to us. We finally get it. We do a report detailing the medical inaccuracies, misinformation, disinformation. As a result of that report, the DOE convened a working group. We convened another report in 2014 where we found out it was indeed a human research project requiring informed consent and a myriad of other things that the University of Hawaii and the Department of Education failed to do to protect children and parents. 2014, the DOE implements their changes, which the major change was opt-in, which means parents now have full participatory power over the control of their child's education. Parents have to affirmatively sign, say, yes, I want my child in this program, and the department has to tell parents what exactly is in that program. And then you can make an evaluated decision, say yes or no, I don't want my child in that program. And, of course, today the legislature, there is a bill that has moved, apparently stalled, House Bill 459. Let's go to the next slide, please. So these new laws, 459, not only reverses the opt-in, opt-out, which is remarkable because they don't even have any data on whether it's working or not. It's only been in there 4 months. And astonishingly, they want to introduce sexuality education to kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade. After the Pono Choices pushback by you folks, they still have not had enough. And while we were focused down here, they went behind our backs, so to speak, to the Board of Education. And they feverishly lobbied a subcommittee behind the scenes. Subcommittee is now poised next week to remove the abstinence part of the state education policy. State education policy is abstinence-based. The Board of Education says, the Board of Education is poised to remove the abstinence part of that out of there. It's counterintuitive to their very mission of delay, delay, delay. And they want to remove the opt in, opt out. So we need to show up and testify, but there'll be more on that later. Next slide. So sex education or lifestyle indoctrination. I want you folks to know I don't call it sex ed because this isn't the sex ed that I had or you had going to school. This isn't, I like to say, your daddy's sex ed. This is something totally different. It is sexuality education. Next slide. This is my quote: the purpose of sexuality education in kindergarten through elementary is to indoctrinate the children in the current politically correct view that homosexuality, transsexuality, and promiscuity are healthy, wholesome, natural, and on par with monogamous heterosexuality. They want to tell our children that it is exactly the same. That is why they are pushing to get it into kindergarten. There is no other reason. There are not unplanned pregnancies in kindergarten. There is not an outbreak of STDs in kindergarten. They do this through reading assignments like this they give the teacher to share with the children things that are already in our schools. Quote, summed up, the myth goes like this: every person is either male or female. That's a myth. And the distinction is based on a person's anatomy. That's a myth. This is from something that came in our schools last year called Teaching Tolerance, and it is supplementary material which you cannot opt out of because you don't know about it. So who's in charge? The parents or Planned Parenthood? Parents made it clear they didn't want parental choices, yet we come in with an even more aggressive program. Who's in charge? Who owns the education system? I thought you folks did. Next, please. Sex education in schools. Planned Parenthood says this is their mission: to assist in developing medically accurate, age-appropriate information. Just assist? No. They are engaged in social engineering. Next, please. The only problem is Planned Parenthood's curriculum is not medically accurate, it's not age-appropriate, and it's not sex education. And we've proven that time and time again. And listen, folks, there's other things I could be doing with my time, but they keep coming after us and after us and after us, and somebody's got to tell them to stop. Next, please. So Hawaii has no state standards on sexuality education K through 5. There are no standards. We have no standards, yes, yet this bill is moving, and it's moving, and it's moving, and it's moving. And anything can happen in the legislature. It's temporarily stalled right now, but on the last day they could revive it, waive their rules, and pass it. So we have to stay vigilant. There is no curriculum to review. So all I could go off is what Planned Parenthood has done in other parts of the country. Even the State Department of Education doesn't want it. So imagine this: parents show up in overwhelming numbers, say we don't want it. The only people who support it is the people who get money from it, Planned Parenthood, because they make money because they write it, Commission on the Status of Women, the LBGT caucus of the Democratic Party, but parents who took time off their job and drove down in the middle of the day to testify, 60 to 30, they still pass the bill. The department says we don't want it. They still pass the bill. Next, please. So is it medically accurate? Well, this is brought to us by the same people who told us the anus was a genital. Next, please. Medically accurate. Quote, if health professionals pushed homosexuality or transgenderism on youth without warning them of the risks, they would be guilty of malpractice. Dr. Rick Fitzsimmons, guilty of malpractice. These programs omit the risks across the board. They don't tell of the elevated risks. Transgenderism is a complex psychological disorder. People my age have trouble grasping what motivates folks to do this, yet we're going to introduce it to second graders because that's what Teaching Tolerance does, and that's what these other programs do. Bailey, the boy with 10,000 dresses, is the name of the supplementary material story. Next, please. So what Planned Parenthood won't tell you is that a Health and Human Services report shows that comprehensive sexuality programs are poor to or mediocre at best. They won't tell you there's an 1,800% greater risk of HIV for anal sex, which puts homosexual men at risk. They won't tell you about the higher risk of HPV for young girls. They'll tell the young girls, just wear a condom, you won't get HPV, you won't get anything as long as you and your partner have a condom. That's not true. Condoms are almost useless against human papillomavirus, yet we keep telling them the wrong information. Next, please. What Planned Parenthood won't tell you, in none of their programs, in none of the literature, they say, young girls, you better watch out. There's a 250% increased risk of oral cancer if you have sex with 5 or more partners. They don't tell them that. You put a condom on there, that's not going to stop you from contracting bacteria or germs because sex is messy. Okay? And you're assuming that they're going to use it perfectly, and no part of their mouth is going to touch any other part except which is covered by the latex. Chlamydia, even if it's cured, can leave young women infertile. That is nowhere, ladies and gentlemen. I can assure you that a 15-year-old girl, if she is told that if she is promiscuous and might be infertile, she's going to think twice. If she's told about a 250% risk of anal cancer, she's going to be very selective. Oral cancer, she's going to be very selective. Even 13% of consistent condom users still contract chlamydia. Next, please. Age appropriate. So-called sexual education before puberty is an act of sexual abuse. That's Dr. Robert McDonald. He's an MD and psychotherapist. Next, please. Age appropriate. Now, this is what the FBI uses to, they say sexual predators use to groom children. Quote, predators use child pornography, so let's just say it's sexually explicit material, to do the following: desensitize children to sex, exposing them to sexually explicit material before they are naturally curious. Before they are naturally curious. First kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, they want to watch Barney. They don't want this slop. Lowering their sexual inhibitions, and they demonstrate or illustrate sexual activity. Next, please. Age appropriate. Is kindergarten too young to teach sex ed? What the left will tell you, and here's their mantra they repeat over and over: the children need the education, the skills, the tools, the education, the information, the skills, the tools. Well, I just told you what the information they want to give them, and it's no information I want my kids to have. And the skills and tools are how to properly put on a condom. That's it. Sexuality education for 5 to 11-year-olds. To reduce STDs or unplanned pregnancy, I have a one-word response to that. Huh? Are you kidding me? How about predator protection module? You know, Pono Choices, all that talk about anal sex, they mention the anus 37 times. Not one word about keeping yourself safe from predators. You tell these kids about anal sex, they can have it. They can have sex when they're ready. It's their responsibility. They're 11 years old. You're setting them up for failure. Next, please. Sex education or sexuality education. Now, here's a quote from a person on the right. The purpose of these programs is to indoctrinate children into the unrestrained, sexually available lifestyle. That's Dr. Judith Reisman. Okay, she's a conservative. Let's see what someone on the other side of the spectrum says. Sex education or sexuality education. Quote, we want educators to teach future generations of children to accept queer sexuality. In fact, our very future depends on it. Recruiting children, you bet we are. Danny Varil, gay activist profiled by GLAAD magazine. His own words, right there. And there's more quotes. You can find more quotes in the report. Next, please. So is it sex education or lifestyle indoctrination? I mean, there's no need for it in kindergarten. So why the push? Why are they pushing this on young children, our children? Why do they want to remove the opt-in where parents have to evaluate what they're going to be taught to the children, the sensitive material? Why? Why the push? Because children will form opinions by the time they reach middle school about what's good and what's not. So they want to inculcate the kids with their views, not your views. And if you don't agree with them, you're a hater, a bigot, and a homophobe. I'm sorry. I disagree with them. Next, please. So here's the old sex ed. This is your dad's sex ed. Gym coach with the whistle, showing the boys what the testes do, how sperm's made. You get none of that now. There's nothing to do with reproduction. And why isn't there anything to do with reproduction? Because reproduction has to lead to the outcome of the miracle of life. Planned Parenthood doesn't believe the fetus or the child in the woman's womb is real. It's just a problem. So they don't talk about the miracle of life, and they are the #1 writers of this sex ed curriculum today. So they don't talk about the miracle of life or what your organs do and the biology based of human reproduction. It's a sexuality lifestyles guide. Tell you how to put a condom on, how you and your partner should go shopping for condoms, because it can be fun and sexy and pleasurable. That's the kind of nonsense that's in these programs. So what do we have today? What you can do with two mommies. Oh, that's nice. So then it was biology-based. Parents had primary responsibility. Today, it's ideologically based, and the government has exclusive authority. Back then, it was factual. Today, it's political. Make no mistake about it, it's political. Gender was fixed. You were either born a man or a woman. Today, gender is a choice. You can be anything you want to be. You can be a man today, a woman tomorrow. You can be transgender. You can be trans man, trans woman. You can be anything you want because gender exists between your ears, not between your legs. It's whatever you choose to be. In their world, what Bruce Jenner is going through is a healthy, wholesome, normal thing. He's just growing. He's just evolving. He's in touch with who he really is. Sex was for human reproduction. Sex is for recreation. Facts about STD prevention, inaccurate STD information. And the girls are the victims here, ladies. The girls are the victims, the young girls. As a father of two daughters, this makes me very angry because they are not being told the real risks of these behaviors and promiscuous behavior. In fact, there's no such thing as promiscuous behavior anymore. In fact, you will not find in any of Planned Parenthood products the term, if you want to have safe sex in the context of a long-term monogamous relationship. Long-term monogamous relationships are now removed. Now, everybody who wants to get married, I think, is in a long-term monogamous relationship, but not in these programs, because homosexual men don't engage in long-term monogamous relationships by and large. So they have to pull that out. So promiscuity is good. Monogamy desirable, anything goes. Planned Parenthood put a family resource book out, and it's in that report, where they cite group sex is okay. Group sex is okay. That's Planned Parenthood. That's the gold standard. It's in your report. Footnoted. You can check the reference. Next, please. So the Board of Education, the bill is stalled in the state legislature. So what's the Board of Education do? Well, they are poised to change the policy. We'll get to that in a minute. From opt-in to opt-out. Make it where your child comes home at the beginning of the year, you sign a form, yeah, my child can participate in all these activities. As opposed to, hey, your child's going to be receiving this sexuality education course. Here's the things we're going to cover. Do you want your child to participate? Planned Parenthood's pushing it. They're the only ones pushing it, and they also have an economic interest because they write these programs. They want to abandon abstinence-based sex education in favor of comprehensive education, sex education. Every study shows that parents want their children to wait till marriage. At very least, delay until adulthood. Every metric shows that children do better when they delay the sexual activity, the introduction of sexual activity. They make more money, they get more education, they have longer lasting relationships when they're adults. Every one. So instead of saying delay, we're going to say, you're 13, if you're ready, just make sure your partner has a condom. Nothing about brain development, nothing about the emotional consequences that go with 13-year-olds getting together, the heartbreak, the heartache, the suicides. Nothing about that, because sex is a right that you have as a 13-year-old, and it's fun, and enjoy it. Just make sure you have a condom. The next Board of Education meeting is April 21st at 1:30 p.m. I'm going to ask all of you to come over there that day at 1 o'clock. We're going to have a press conference in front of the BOE. We're going to show up and testify, and we're going to let them know that they can't make these changes in the dark, that they have to ask you, the parents, because you own the system. You pay the taxes. You pay their salary, and it's yours. So what I'd like you to do, everybody pull out your smartphone right now. I'm almost done. Pull it out. The quicker you pull it out, the quicker I'll be done. They get to the main event. I'm just the warm-up act. I want you to go to your email, and here's your call to action. You came tonight, you care. I want you to email right here to BOE Hawaii at notes.k12.hi.us. I want you to email that. The subject, sex ed policy. Please, in your own words, if you feel compelled, tell them not to change the policy. I would suggest you tell them not to remove abstinence, but I can't spell abstinence, so don't change the policy. Don't touch them. Leave them. The last thing I want to tell you before I introduce the doc is the solution to this is strategic risk avoidance. The solution is to tell our children with programs that build character and education, tell them to delay, 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 delay. Hopefully till marriage. Offer them programs that make them a better person. But delay, delay, delay. They shouldn't be having sex at 13 and 14. They shouldn't be having sex. If they say, well, they're going to do it anyway, well, my question is that how we handle smoking? Is that how we handle drugs? Is that how we handle underage drinking? No. But in this case, the sex hustlers and the sexperts and the sex industry have a lot of money at stake, and they want to get paid to put these new programs in. So I'd do that. So now I'd like to introduce the star of the show. Dr. Joe McIlhaney came out here to help us. We're very grateful he came out here. We've been on the radio all week. He was an obstetrician, Ob-Gyn, one of the top guys in Texas. He will tell you he had a practice in vitro, and Walter, you and I talked about that. And that practice led him to start the Medical Institute of Hawaii. He was on the President's Commission of HIV and AIDS, President George W. Bush, and he was also an advisor to the CDC in Atlanta. So, ladies and gentlemen, would you give me a warm welcome, a big aloha to Dr. George McIlhaney.
Thank you, Representative McDermott. He's become one of my heroes. I don't feel like I really need to say anything, but since I'm here from Dallas, Texas, I guess I should go ahead and talk a little bit. You know, we're here for one reason, and that is to help our children, your children, achieve their potential, to help them flourish, to help them not have baggage that they carry in adulthood that will weigh them down and keep them from being able to achieve the success that they are capable of achieving as they get older. We know that one of the biggest risks to them, because research and data shows this, is to have distorted ideas of sexuality and then to begin acting on those in ways that can really damage them. And Bob has mentioned several of these already. I'll mention some as I talk here tonight too. But we're here talking to you who are parents. We're talking to policymakers. We're talking to mentors. We're talking to churches. We're talking to anyone that has children under their influence to help you be confident of what you're teaching your kids. And we're here not just saying believe us because we know we're right. We're here because we have data that can show why the approach we're talking about is the right approach to helping kids in this area that's so important. You may, let's put it this way, I run into people who are pretty confident that what they want for their kids is right. They don't want them exposed to this distorted information about sex. And yet they see these people come along and say, well, the pregnancy rates are so high and the disease rates are so high that maybe I'm a little old and wrong, and maybe we need to let some of this information come to our children. Well, we're here to show you with the data that some of what Bob has already shown you, but some of what I'll show you, that you're right in not wanting this distorted information to be what your children are exposed to. Now, my background, as Representative McDermott said, I'm an Ob-Gyn. I started being involved in infertility care way back in '68 when there's not a lot we could do for people that couldn't get pregnant. And as these progress, as our techniques progressed and we began laparoscoping women and looking in, we could again and again would see these young women who had gotten married, expected to get pregnant when they stopped their birth control if they used it, and then couldn't get pregnant and come to our office, and we'd scope them and we'd see in their female organs, it looked like glue had been poured on them. There was so much scar. And we began realizing that most of those were there because of sexually transmitted disease from the people that could afford to have this kind of care, primarily chlamydia. They'd become infected from sex back when they were in high school or college, had no idea back then that they could even get a disease that would cause this, had no idea they'd been infected, and then 5 or 10 years later in their marriage found they couldn't get pregnant. At that time, it was the most common reason. If a woman was the infertile part of the couple, it was the most common reason for a woman to be infertile. Today, it's the second most common reason. So it's still extremely common. And about 10% of sexually active high school kids are infected with chlamydia right now. So it's just a devastating epidemic. So what we're trying to say is that your kids need the right attitude, the right ideas about sex. They can be taught wrong. So first I'm going to show you some of the error that you'll be exposed to in considering Pono choices and other so-called comprehensive sex ed programs. And then I want to talk a little bit about how the adolescent brain develops, which I think is pretty interesting because it helps show us that we have to really tenderly care for our young people's minds and brains as they develop. They are so susceptible to hearing information that can distort their brains and distort it permanently. So let's go ahead and look at our slides here. I'm going to stand over here. That's okay, Paul. Now, like this, if it'll hold. There we go. So, you know, I call it the Trojan horse because of what you're being told to, in a sense, make you feel guilty about not complying with those people that would want their form of sex education taught in your schools. So they give you distorted information about the terrible condition of your kids, primarily about pregnancy rates and STD rates. They make you feel guilty if you don't accept their form of education, their program, because they promise you that that will solve the problem and that nothing else except their program will solve the problem your kids are facing. And your kids are going to face it. That's what they're saying. But then they sneak their sexual philosophy into the classroom with the Hawaiian kids and kids across the country too, I'll say, essentially to brainwash the children with this information. And it's a Trojan horse. They say, we got to solve this problem of pregnancy and STD. Your kids are going to be affected by this. And in that context, then bring in their philosophy about sexuality. Next slide. So here are the primary messages. As in the slides I'm going to follow this with, the primary messages that they use to justify accepting their program, let's say Pono choices and others, a program that cannot and will not solve the problems they shout about. The reason they're telling you that you must bring Pono choices here is because of pregnancy rates and STD rates. Representative McDermott sent me a lot of material, and Susan did, and I went over this extensively as I was preparing to come here, and that's the reason they say you must accept their program, because of pregnancy rates and STD rates. Okay, so the question I'll throw out right here is, will their program stop STD rates and stop pregnancy among your teenage kids? So I'll state their messages first, and I'll show how distorted they are, and then some of the truth about it. Next slide. They say Hawaii has one of the highest teen pregnancy rates in the United States, a disgrace. Essentially, all kids will have sex in high school. They must be prepared to protect themselves. Comprehensive sex education work statistics show this. Abstinence, sexual risk avoidance, SRA, doesn't work. Statistics show this. Kids can engage in sex and be safe, and they'll say that again and again. Anyone opposed to their program is a right-wing religious fanatic consumed with sex. I think they've said that about your representative, McDermott. He's consumed with sex. He's consumed with the good of your kids. Next slide. So, teen pregnancy rates in Hawaii. Their distortion is that Hawaii has an unacceptably high teen pregnancy rate, one of the highest in the nation. Well, it's true that any unmarried teen who's pregnant is a problem for both her, the kid, and even for the guy that got her pregnant. Even one is too many. And yes, Hawaii teen pregnancy rates is the ninth highest in the United States, 65 per 1,000 girls. But what they don't tell you is that that rate has been dramatically declining with whatever it is you're doing in this state right now for your kids. It's down 58% since 1991. It's down 11% just in the past 3 years. You're to be congratulated for the fact that your teen pregnancy rate's falling dramatically, not criticized. It's not a reason to bring the program in. It's a reason not to change anything because the pregnancy rates are doing so well here. So that's their first distortion. Next slide. Sexual activity among high schoolers. Their distortion is that essentially all high school students will be having sex by the time of graduation. They have to be prepared for that when it occurs in their lives. Well, the truth is that, yeah, a lot of kids in high schools are having sex, but the majority aren't across the United States. But look here in Hawaii, especially here, the number of young people in this state who are still virgins is increasing. But besides that, Hawaii has one of the lowest rates of sexual activity among kids in high schools in the entire United States. It's about 35.9% of Hawaiian high school students ever having sex. Nationwide, it's almost 50%. Nationwide, the number's coming down, and in this state, it's coming down too. So again, you're to be congratulated. You have one of the lowest rates of kids getting involved in sex in the entire United States. You're to be congratulated for whatever it is you're doing here. I think it's probably your family structure and the desire on the part of you who are parents to have strong families and have strong families where you're communicating your values to your kids. But they'll use that as an excuse to bring their program in and change everything. And believe me, that's what it would do. Next slide. Comprehensive sex education, CSE we'll call it. Their distortion is that statistics show CSE works. Let me just say, before I go into this even more, that not one of their programs has shown a significant long-term drop in pregnancy rates. Not one of their programs has lowered sexually transmitted infection rates. And essentially, none of their programs have been effective in getting kids to start using their condoms every single time they have sex. There have been total failures. I'll go through this a little bit with you. But they have not accomplished what they tell you they must bring their program into town for. None of the programs evaluated reduced sexually transmitted infection rates. The most recent comprehensive evaluation of comprehensive sex education programs for pregnancy showed the following. This is for pregnancy. Of 28 such programs, the National Campaign to Prevent Teen Pregnancy is a relatively liberal group. I was on the research task force. I was one of about 28 people, the only one that you would call sort of conservative. But they do some pretty good statistics. They listed as having the strongest evidence for success in preventing pregnancy 20 programs, 20 of these comprehensive programs. 20 did not measure the rates of pregnancy as an outcome at all. Yet they were proposed and taught to lower pregnancy. But 20 didn't even measure whether kids got pregnant or not. Of the 8 that did, 2 didn't reduce teen pregnancy. So 3 of those 8 had an impact on teen pregnancy that lasted less than 12 months. That's not too long when a pregnancy itself lasts 9 months. So they only had, success for a few months, so you wouldn't want that in your schools. Next slide. Only 3 reduced teen pregnancy for 12 months or more out of those 8 successful programs. 8 across the whole United States that they counted as really successful programs. One of these was not a sex ed program at all. It didn't even mention sex, but it did measure pregnancy outcome, and it was, I think, a community program, probably basketball and so forth. One was found on second evaluation to have no impact at all. Only 1 out of all the programs, these comprehensive sex ed programs in the United States, only 1 was found to reduce teen pregnancy rates for at least 12 months. And this is the kind of program they're telling you need to bring to Hawaii to lower pregnancy rates and sexually transmitted infection rates. Next slide. The program from which it came was evaluated, and that evaluation only showed that it increased condom use rates for kids who were sexually active when they came into the program. For the kids that were virgins, and that was only for 6 months. And the kids that were virgins who came into the program didn't increase their use of condoms at all. So the program on which Pono Choices was based was basically a flat failure as far as the kind of program we're talking about, lowering pregnancy rates and STD rates. Next slide. Okay, they'll tell you that the so-called abstinence programs, that you can call them any number of things, abstinence only, which is really used to try to make you think that all they were pinch-headed, didn't really talk about real sex when they call them abstinence only, but we can call them sexual risk avoidance programs. They say that they just don't work at all. There's no evidence, which is absolutely just an out-and-out lie. The truth is that evidence-based statistics show that many of these programs are very effective. 8 programs were highlighted by Weed and Lacona. Weed is probably the outstanding researcher in the United States on this kind of program. And they did a report that is just now out. It's a brand new report, and it's the most comprehensive report on these sex ed programs that's out in the United States today. That the risk avoidance, which means avoiding risk, which means not having sex, that means abstinence. But 8 programs are highlighted by them, and these programs cut the rates of teen sexual activity by an average of about 50%. Which means that about 50% of the kids in the programs didn't initiate sex, didn't start having sex. And that lasted for at least a year or 2 among those kids avoiding sex if they were in the program, more than the kids that weren't in their programs. The use of condoms by the young people who were sexually active was not reduced by these programs. And that's one of the criticisms. They'll say, well, if you teach them all about abstinence, then they'll stop using condoms when they do have sex. And the studies clearly show that's not so. Let's see the next slide then. And, the body of research suggests that teaching adolescents to avoid sexual activity is a viable primary preventive strategy, one that can fully prevent the harmful and costly consequences of sex. Now, when I showed you those results of the abstinence programs, it said delay the onset of sexual activity. It sounds a little technical, doesn't it? Like a little statistical kind of thing is that really that important? It is extremely important. Next slide, please. Because what we know is that the older a person is when they initiate sexual activity, the less sexual partners they will have in their lifetime. If we can help young people delay the onset of sexual activity by 2 years, say from the age of 14 to the age of, let's say, 18, you have helped them cut the number of sexual partners they might have by at least half, perhaps more than that. And if you can help them delay the onset of sexual activity till after they're 21, you basically help them cut their number of sexual partners to 1 or 2, which means most of the time they're going to be married, which is really what we'd like to see, is these kids not get involved in sex at all until they do get married. So, but whatever, if we can help them cut the age at which they start sex, we dramatically impact their chance of getting infected with these diseases, and also, of course, in getting pregnant. By the way, they've also shown that the older kids are, if they do start having sex, the better they use their contraceptives if they do have access to those and do use them, because they're more mature. Next slide. So having multiple sexual partners is a major risk factor for sexually transmitted infections and disease. Next. And the more people you have sexual contact with, the greater your overall exposure risk. This is true for concurrent partners as well as for monogamous consecutive relationships. Mayo Clinic taught us that. So by delaying sex, which these good programs do, like Choosing the Best, Not Me, Not Now, Right Choices, these programs have a dramatic impact, are shown to be very successful. And if you're going to have a program in your schools, that's the kind of program you want, one that actually produces real results and that they can show you produces real results. Next slide. They'll tell you that the kids can have sex and they will have sex, and therefore all they have to do is use their condoms and contraceptives and they're safe. Sex is a normal human appetite. It's fine for kids to do it. Condoms and contraceptives make it safe enough, and it is true that sex is a normal human appetite. But the rest of that statement is just an out-and-out lie that you're constantly being bombarded with. And this is what can make people that aren't knowledgeable like you are feel guilty about not letting programs come in and teach their kids how to use condoms. These people have been repeating this lie for years. If you believe this lie, if you believe this, you're believing a lie. And so I'll explain this with basically unassailable research information for you. Next slide. Essentially, all studies show that if condoms are not used with every act of intercourse, that is as though they were not used at all as far as protecting or even reducing the risk of sexually transmitted infection. It's almost unbelievable, but it's true. There's I'll talk about a study here that shows condoms do reduce the risk of HIV if they're used every single time. But in that CDC report that came out in 2013, again, they say this. They say if condoms were not used for every single sex act, it was as though they were not used at all as far as getting infected with HIV. Even with use of condoms with every single act of intercourse, though, the relative risk of infection with most sexually transmitted infections is about 50%. And the body of information about this has been growing. So if the program's effective and get your kids, by the way, which no comprehensive sex ed program has ever done, but if the program were to be effective in getting your kid that gets sexually active to use condoms with every single sex act, they still have a 50% chance of getting infected with chlamydia and gonorrhea and herpes and HPV and syphilis. And they lower the risk of getting HIV infected by 85%, but there's a relative risk relative to if they didn't use their condoms of about 14% of getting infected with HIV, which is a lifelong infection that totally changes their life for the rest of their life. So condoms are not the answer. And besides that, none of the comprehensive sex ed programs have ever been able to accomplish getting kids to use their condoms in the way that's effective, even to reduce the risk by half. Next slide. Anal sex. The study I mentioned a minute ago from CDC about anal sex and condoms, it was the first study in about 15 years on whether condoms do any good at all with anal sex, because with anal sex they tend to rupture more, slip more, but they did show that if men used them every single time, it reduced the risk of getting HIV infected by about 70%. Now this article has not been duplicated, and you always look a little askance at studies that, for example, about condoms that have only been done one time. But at any rate, it required that they use it every single time, or it was as though they didn't use them at all as far as getting infected. And as far as oral sex, there's not a single study that shows that condoms and dental dams, which is just a piece of latex, reduce the risk of HPV infection in the mouth of kids that do oral sex, from which then, as Bob has mentioned, there's a dramatic increase in throat and oral cancers from. Next slide. So we see that abstinence programs are in general much more comprehensive, The reason I say this is because the comprehensive sex ed programs, not one of those programs, and we've been looking at these things for 20 years at our office at the Medical Institute, not one of these programs gives the data I just gave you about the effectiveness and ineffectiveness of condoms, not one of them. But the abstinence programs almost always do give very good, clear information about what kids can expect and what you as parents can expect your kids to experience with condoms. So the abstinence programs really are more comprehensive than the so-called comprehensive sex ed programs. Next slide. Coming to you soon, by the way, I just thought I'd throw this up here to warn you, is LARC, long-acting reversible contraception, and two things, IUDs and subdermal hormone implants. These are being strongly advocated by the American College of Pediatricians and also by the American College of Ob-Gyn. Strongly pushed on your doctors, your pediatricians and your Ob-Gyn doctors for your kids, because once they get an IUD in a girl or get a subdermal implant of hormone, they won't get pregnant. The problem is that there is absolutely no protection against diseases, and the diseases are epidemic. 20 million new cases of STD in this country, 10 million among people 24 years of age and younger. The young people are the ones that are suffering from these things, and you know who it is that suffers the most? It's the girls. These things make girls a sex object. A girl gets an IUD in at the age of 14 or 15 or 16. The guys find out she has it in. They can say, well, you have an IUD and we can have sex whenever. The other friends find out that she can have sex because she can't get pregnant. So it's really it's misogynist. It's really unfair to girls. Again, girls are the ones that suffer these things. Sex is sexist. Next slide. Well, opposition to comprehensive sexuality education. Anyone that's opposed to this is a right-wing religious fanatic obsessed with sex, like we said. Well, the truth of the fact is that most parents, regardless of race or political party, support sexual avoidance by their kids. They don't want their kids having sex. As a matter of fact, most of the studies, 75-80% of parents want their kids not to have sex until they get married. And after all, 95% of kids in college say they want to get married, and they want to get married soon, and they want to marry someone from whom they never divorce. So marriage is a big thing for kids in college particularly, and just out of college. Almost 3/4 of parents are opposed to premarital sex in general and for their adolescents. Now, you'll see studies that say, well, parents, 75 or 80% of parents think kids ought to be told about contraceptives. Yes. But then if they're re-questioned and told, well, the sex ed programs that are teaching about condoms say, well, the girl ought to get a guy, they ought to go to the drugstore, they ought to buy some condoms, they ought to talk about how they can enjoy each other sexually. 75-80% of parents are opposed to that. So they're really opposed to this sort of education that's being proposed for your kids here in Hawaii. And by the way, the next slide, the kids say the same thing. 93% of kids say that it's important to be given a strong societal message that they should abstain from sex, at least out of high school, until at least out of high school. 87% of teens don't think it's embarrassing to admit they're virgins. By the way, this study is done by the National Campaign, and this type of report has been present in their study, which they do almost annually for 10 years. The kids think they need to be guided to abstain from sexual intercourse. Next slide. Okay, kids' innocence is so uncomplicated. It's just a beautiful thing. I'm going to show you a few comments from little kids. The kids that they're saying you ought to expose to their graphic, sexualizing, age-inappropriate material. Dave, age 8, which would they be, the 3rd grade, maybe, 2nd, 3rd grade. Love will find you even if you're trying to hide from it, and I've been trying to hide from it since I was 5, but the girls keep finding me. Next slide. Kelly, age 9, never kiss in front of other people. It's embarrassing, but if nobody sees you, I might be willing to try it with a handsome boy for just a few hours. Howard, age 8, the rule goes like this. If you kiss someone, then you should marry them and have kids with them. It's the right thing to do. Next slide. Ricky, age 7. Now, look, these are the ages that they're talking about. Coming into your schools and talking to them about gay, lesbian, transgendered, bisexual. This is the age, these innocent, cute little kids, they're so naive. Tell your wife she looks pretty even if she looks like a truck. And then Roger says, don't forget your wife's name, that'll mess up the love. And Kristen finally, no person really decides before they grow up who they're going to marry. God decides it all way before, and you get to find out later who you're stuck with. Now look, these are the kids we're going to start dumping this sexualizing information on, these cute, very naive, sweet kids. Next slide. Well, look, let me talk to you a little bit about the adolescent brain. Do I have time, Bob? Or? Okay, I did a book called Hooked with Frida Bush, who's the president of the Medical Institute organization that I do this from and for. They didn't pay me for doing it, and they get all the proceeds, which I say it's a very nonprofit. But at any rate, we'd talked about the diseases and pregnancy and the education and so forth, but in the 90s we started realizing there was a lot of material about the brain and how it developed. And I was on the research task force, like I said, for the National Campaign to Prevent Teen Pregnancy. We had a researcher come in and talk to us about some scans they were doing of kids there at the NIH, and that the adolescent brain didn't mature until about the mid-20s. I said, what? And so this is a guy named Jay Geed, and so I called Jay and asked if I could come down there. So I went down to the NIH where he did his scans in the big hospital there, and just sat and talked to him and looked at some of his scans with him. And I just want to show you some of that, but then from that, then more and more information about the adolescent brain's been developing. The reason I wanted to show you this is just to show you how important it is that we guide what goes into those kids' brains, because they're so susceptible. And what they hear, you'll hear me talk here about experience. Well, education, what they're told in the classroom is experience that changes their brain. So when I talk about experience, remember, I'm talking about education, which in this case, if you allow Pono choices into your schools, particularly with these younger kids, that will be an experience that will fire their brains and mold their brains to believing that's the kind of behavior they might get involved in. Okay, the adolescent brain's susceptible to ideas. It's moldable. I'll show you what I mean. It can develop patterns of behavior that can be either harmful or helpful or harmful. And you who care about young people need to be aware of this information and to be wary about what you teach your kids. Next slide. Okay, magnetic resonance imaging is done with basically with big magnets, so it can be used, and that's what Jay Geed found. He could do these studies every year with CT, computerized tomography. That's radiation. You can't do that every year on a kid's brain, but he found out he could do MRIs and look at kids' brains year after year after year, which is what he did. And then there's functional MRI, which we don't need to discuss. It shows if there's blood flow. The part of the brain that's active will require more blood flow, and they can pick that up. So if you're thinking love, the part of the brain that is active with loving will show more blood flow, and they can find that as they watch with functional MRI. Next slide. PET scans, the same thing, except they use glucose. And they can identify the part of the brain that's using glucose faster, because when the brain works, it has to use glucose to work, and they can spot the area of the brain that's using more glucose as being active and functioning to show what it's thinking, if you will, and where it's thinking it. Okay, now, next. We also can now measure neurochemicals. Can you imagine the tiny number of molecules of chemicals that are in the brain that actually influence the way we think? There are over 100 of these chemicals, and we now can analyze those and find what's happening partly by measuring the chemicals. The receptors have to be present in the brain for these chemicals to be active, and the more receptors for a particular chemical, for example, like oxytocin, the more oxytocin receptors, and women have more of those than men do, then the more the brain's going to respond to that oxytocin. So within our skulls is an organ, our brain, that's a cauldron of chemicals just surging and affecting what we think and what we feel. So our brains are filled with these chemicals that influence the way we think and act and behave. Next slide. Okay, look on the right. It says frontal lobe. That's a part of your brain right here in the front of your head. And that's an important thing we're going to talk about here. Next slide. By the way, the brain is the brain is the most complicated piece of machinery in the entire universe. 10 billion neurons, those are brain cells, 100 billion support cells, 100 trillion connections, way, way more than all the internet connections in the world or that there ever will be in the world. Next slide. The discovery that the prefrontal cortex, remember that's part of the brain I was mentioning, is not fully mature till the mid-20s or later, is one of the startling findings of modern brain imaging. That's what Jay Gee, this guy I was talking about, found. And sort of in a sense opened up this whole field of study and understanding of adolescence. This helps answer one of our questions: why do young people sometimes do such stupid things? Actually, why did we do such stupid things when we were young people? Next slide. The prefrontal cortex really, in a sense, is who we are. The prefrontal cortex is where we have judgment, we have seen into the future, seeing how behavior can affect the future, moral intelligence, abstract thinking, seeing what's not obvious, planning for the future, rational behavior and decision-making, understanding rules of social conduct. You'll notice none of this says which is good or bad. It just says that is where our thinking about how we want to act comes from. And my point is that can be molded to think good things, or it can be molded to think bad things are okay. Good things are okay, or bad things are okay. Can come from here. Next slide. Just real quickly, this is... I'm going to walk over here and point to the prefrontal cortex and watch how it gets bluer and bluer, because this is composite studies that Jay Gee did and then published. Actually, I think these were in Time magazine. So I'll show you where to watch for. We're looking at this prefrontal cortex, that area right there. That's age 5. Next slide. Age 8, there's a little more blue. Next slide. Age 12, that's a little more blue. Next slide's age 16, a little more blue. Age 20, still not totally mature. And then by 25 is about when Jay Gee found they were pretty much totally mature. Life experience, remember I said that could even be education. What's taught in the schoolroom causes synapses to live and strengthen or wither and die. This process molds the brain until finally in adulthood it sets. So what the kids are taught, what they learn, what they experience as children molds their brain, and it sort of sets as they get into adulthood. And the final brain structure then guides thoughts and behavior. Now, if it's molded poorly, it can guide them into bad behavior. If it's molded well, it can guide them into good behavior. I'll talk about the two paths. We now know that adolescent brains are exquisitely responsive to experience that they're having. It's vital. You make sure you know what your kids are being exposed to. Vital. Next slide. This is a synapse. The axon, these are 2 brain cells, and you can see where they connect. Look at the bottom down there. You can see how the axon of one cell goes over to the cell body of another cell. Well, if there are more and more connections like that, then that area of the brain is going to be more active in that area of thought or action. Next slide. So Jay Gee did this, and I'll go over here and show you again. On the left shows how all these brain cells can be connected. On the right, well, maybe you can see it from there. They're little scissors. And if an area of the brain isn't being used, the scissors basically, the synapses break down and just die. And if they're used, then those brain cells strengthen that part of the brain. An example: a professional violin player, if they do scans of the brain, the part of the brain that controls the fingers of the left hand that control the strings of the violin, that part of the violin player's brain is thicker. They can see it bigger because so many more brain cells have developed and thickened to control those fingers. But on the other hand, people from the Far East often can't say L's and R's because those aren't in their language, and so the part of the brain responsible for those sounds just dies. And a lot of those people can never say L's and R's because they just cannot develop the brain structure to make that happen. So that's just graphic examples of how the brain works. Next slide. The brain's final structure is formed as a result of experience repeated over and over again and experience taught. Patterns of behavior become part of who we are and what we do because that's what our brain structures become. Now, we're not totally, we're not totally subject to what our brains tell us to do because we have morals and ethics and values and what our parents have taught, but we are guided by this stuff in the brain. Our kids are. And we're generally unaware that our brains actually sort of make us do things. We know what habits are. In a sense, we're saying that's a habit. Next slide. Lust, love, infatuation, marriage, being told in a second grade classroom that you might be homosexual or lesbian or that sex is okay if you're, these things are powerful experiences that can mold a lot of what you do, what you think. So what does modern neuroscience tell us is going on about that sort of thing? Well, when people have sex, usually continue to seek out sex whether they're married or not. If they get started, it's hard for them to stop. And what enables a couple who've been married many years, sometimes after having intercourse with each other, to say it's a miracle that we've been doing this for so long and still enjoy it so much? How can that happen? Next slide. Well, dopamine is one part of it. Dopamine is called a reward signal. And it's excreted into the brain, secreted in the brain with excitement and pleasure and new things. If you do something new, dopamine floods your brain. If it's exciting, dopamine floods your brain. If you take a risk, it floods your brain, and it floods the brain with addictive drugs. Next slide. And then, of course, also with sex. And dopamine produces intense energy and exhilaration, focused attention, and a desire to repeat that. And so when people have sex, it's exciting and pleasurable, and the dopamine drives them to want to repeat that again. So it's very important that we make sure we know what our kids' experience is in that area and not to have that, in a sense, turned on early. We are biologically designed to enjoy new things. That's how we find new sources of food and have the gall to ask somebody to marry us or to say yes and find out where dangers are. Next slide. In a sense, it's addiction. I'm not going to read this whole slide, but it's sort of an addiction when we get involved in something that's so pleasurable, and dopamine drives that. Next slide. Why do the risks of pregnancy, disease, abuse, emotional damage not deter males and females from sexual involvement? In other words, why do the words of Tammy Wynette's song, "Stand By Your Man," ring so true? Next slide. We talk about oxytocin for a minute. These are only two hormones of the brain that we'll talk about, but oxytocin is produced by the brain with labor. It's what causes labor contractions. That Pitocin they put in your drip when you were in labor, ladies, if you needed some help, was oxytocin. Suckling with breastfeeding, oxytocin pours out, actually causes the milk letdown. Orgasms, oxytocin secreted into the woman's brain. Men have a little oxytocin, not very much. And then touching between individuals, skin to skin with men, between a man and a woman, or even between two women or two men, can cause the production of a lot of oxytocin. Next slide. Next slide, we just talked about that. So it's released into a woman's brain when she's touched in a meaningful way or an intimate way, and it increases her desire for more touch from the other person. And it's a powerful bonding between a mother and a baby, and also then between a woman and a man. And there's no reason to think it can't be between two women also. Next slide. Men have vasopressin, which does sort of the same thing. It's not as powerful as its impact on men, but some people have called vasopressin the monogamy molecule for men. Next slide. They're released during intimate contact. The very process of spending time together, touching each other, having sex, sleeping next to each other night after night creates a powerful bond, partly biochemical, between partners. Now, see, I think that God made us, and I think God made oxytocin to bond a couple together for life, and He made dopamine to make them enjoy sex, so they enjoy being together in that way also for life. But it can be distorted. Anything that we have as human beings can be distorted. Next. Now, Lewin Brizendine is a neuropsychiatrist at the University of California. She wrote a book about oxytocin. I just thought this is really interesting that you need to hear this. It has to do with trust. Matter of fact, they've shown that if in a game they have men spray oxytocin spray into their nose, they'll trust a person in that game more than if they didn't have the oxytocin sprayed into their nose. Well, the trust impact of oxytocin is so pronounced that Lewin Brizendine said from an experience on hugging, we also know that oxytocin is naturally released in the brain after a 20-second hug from a partner, sealing the bond between the huggers and triggering the brain's trust circuits. So don't let a guy hug you unless you plan to trust him. So fair warning. Next slide. When a person's body's in intimate contact with another person, the entire person's connected. In other words, these things produce sort of a connectedness when you include all of this information. A person's inborn need and foreign ability to connect with another person is a human characteristic that has to be nurtured and protected for a person to prosper. And so sex can greatly benefit this connection, or it can greatly damage it. Next slide. And non-marital sex often leads to damaged connectedness. Marital sex often leads to healthy connectedness. So the connectedness that's natural and normal and so important for us can be damaged when we're kids. If we start having multiple sexual partners, having sex, breaking up can damage that ability. And they've shown clearly with multiple studies that when people have had multiple sexual partners, then later on marry, they're more likely to divorce. And of course, if that happens, they have kids. It leaves the children without a mother and a dad in the home. And it can lead to this destructive pattern that we don't want to see happen with our kids. Next slide. Bonding always occurs with sexual involvement as far as science can tell. And I just said about the breakup, hookup, breakup culture. Next slide. And what we now know also is that when kids are sexually involved and not married, they're more likely to be depressed. Matter of fact, the suicide rate is up, depression rates are up for both boys and girls compared to kids that are still virgins. And I ask, okay, and we see this in college studies also, how can a kid do real well on their LCAT or MCAT if they're so depressed they feel like there's no hope, which is what we see with up to 50% of college kids at some point in their studies, and they have directly related that these kids' sexual activity. Next slide. We just said that. Next slide. Evidence seems to show that the more sex partners we have, the more our innate attachment ability seems to be threatened. Next slide. And adolescents are just unaware of the powerful inner forces that can arise if they become involved sexually. The inner forces can control their behavior just as surely as drug addiction can. Guidance away from this real and present danger can and must come from us adults. Next slide. This says the same thing. Next slide. Says the same thing. Next slide. Final word from me about what you're challenged with here. Once you allow porno choices or other such into your schools, you'll never get it out. You'll never get it out. You should never allow this in without long and serious consideration. You should never allow this material into your schools without knowing every word of its content. Next slide. You should never allow a sex ed program into your schools without knowing that it is highly successful in accomplishing what those who support such a program say they want it in your schools for. If they say it's because of teen pregnancy, you must have them prove by studies done on that program that it will not just statistically be successful, but that it dramatically decreases pregnancy rates in students. If they say they're bringing it because of pregnancy, you make them prove that in past research that program has dramatically lowered pregnancy rates. Otherwise, don't let that program in your schools. There's no reason for it. If they say it's because of sexually transmitted disease rates, apply the same standard. They must show it lowers pregnancy STD rates, or don't let it in your schools. It's a farce, and it's a Trojan horse used as an excuse to get their philosophy into your kids' brains. If you want the program in your schools, be sure it's a program tested not in a test group outside schools, because it's a school sex ed program. Make sure it's been tested in schools, because a lot of these programs have been tested with select groups outside schools, and they say, well, it works for schools, when they haven't even proved it works in schools at all. So can you say this about Pono Choices? That's for you to decide. Thank you for letting me be here. It's been a tremendous pleasure.
Okay, we're going to do we got a few minutes for questions and answers, and then we have something special to give to Doc. So Mr. Rollman is going to go over here to the microphone, and we'll take your questions. Now, he's a big man, so there's no speeches. We want to handle as many questions as possible in the few minutes that we have. So if anyone has a question, just go up there. Mr. Rollman is there, and if you can condense your question into 15 seconds or so, Doc or I will be happy to take it. Any questions at all? Okay.
The information that you've shared here, can we find a hard copy of it somewhere to share with people that we can share it with?
Yes, we'll print it up. I have his entire slide presentation, so if you want it, call the office and ask for this handsome gentleman here, Mr. Paul Canojo. Let's give Paul a hand, because he wasn't here earlier.
Bob, we'll also post it online.
And also, the Medical Institute website is www.medinstitute.org, and you can get lots of information off our website, similar to this, but of course a lot more also. www.medinstitute.org.
Rep Ward, would you come up here, please? When I first met Doc, we have one last thing to do. Fecky, you want to come up too? And Doc, you want to come up? We're going to give him a certificate. Thank him for coming to Hawaii. Yeah, you, Dr. Cregan, you want to come up? You guys come on up on the stage here. Okay, so no questions. Keith, get your camera ready, okay? Oh, you have a question?
Yes. Yes.
Outline for us the basic components of how you compare. What are the elements of a sound abstinence-based program in contrast with what the Pono Choices?
I won't go into all the details of it because that'd be boring, but one of the first things is that you have a teacher that actually believes that the young people can make that choice to remain free of sexual involvement. That is a key factor. A second is that they understand the benefits for not just now but for the future. And a third is that they be taught, and like I say, most of these programs will actually, the abstinence programs will teach about contraceptives, but teach the things that I told you tonight about them. So it gives them a contrast between the benefits of being sexually abstinent and, in a sense, the risks of getting involved in sex, even with the use of contraceptives. I'm not an educator, but there are, those of you who are here know that there are different criteria for successful sex ed or education programs. So these programs that have been successful have been written by real curriculum writers that are skilled at doing curriculum that's successful for kids.
You know, Doc is going to hang around. We'll be here, so if you want to get him one-on-one, Doc, why don't you get in the middle of these guys? I'd like to acknowledge these three gentlemen who took out time out of their evening to hear Dr. Cregan. Fecky, Rep. Ward, Dr. Cregan, and Gene is the senior guy who's been in the state legislature for about 100 years. Why don't you thank the doctor for coming?
Doc, this is something that warms the heart of Hawaii because we thought we were all alone. It sounds like you've been talking all around the country about something that is a national phenomenon, not just Hawaii. So we shouldn't feel isolated. We shouldn't feel that we're alone, but we know that there's a battle ahead to protect the children. And Bob, thank you for bringing the doc here. Let's give Bob McDermott a round of applause. Bob, the fearless fighter. And lastly, I think we know that Canada has been a great contributor to our awakening and understanding of this. If you remember the rock star, what's the name of the rock star from Canada? Phil Lees, who's also a part. So this is, I don't think Phil is out here.
Dave Wilbur's up there.
Where's Dave Wilbur? David, thank you. Thank you. It takes not only a village, it takes a world, but it takes a particular physician from Texas to come and do it. Let's give him another round of applause. Thank you, doctor. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. We'll hang around for questions. Thank you for coming. Great turnout, about 150 people tonight. Thank you so much. Aloha and God bless you all.